everyone. This is update for April 14, 2023, day 415 of the war, end of the date update. It's also catch up for April 13, 2023. So I just want to quickly provide the update on the banking crisis in the US, where it stands right now. So as you can see, it's definitely sort of under, well, I wouldn't say under control, but it's not flaring up, right? It's slightly coming down. As you can see, the amount of primary credit, basically what's borrowed by the banks in trouble, plus the this bank term funding program, it's definitely, the sum goes down. The same is going on in terms of stress on international markets, in terms of need of the US dollar. So things are, I wouldn't say they are okay, normal, because as long as interest rates are where they are right now, banks have a problem. And, this problem might be long term, not going to be, immediate result, but we may see from time to time some banks are going belly up as they're getting more sort of damage from this high interest rates. But at the same time, there's definitely things are not sort of blowing up in uncontrollable fashion, let's put this way. Now let's actually move to China. There's so I would characterize the whole situation. It's as tense, as close to the war as it only gets at this point. So, and let me just kind of go through all of the sort of, factual information. First of all, there is no ambassador, Chinese ambassador to the US for past, I think, 3 or 6 months. So then I think on April 13, China sanctioned Michael McCall. This is the head of the lower chamber Foreign Affairs Committee. So basically someone who is responsible for developing foreign policy in the US, or almost close to be in charge of it, or extremely senior person, let's put this way. So they just slapped the sanctions, in Chinese, and without even questioning. There is no desire to have any conversation with the US, despite many attempts from the White House to have so-called dialogue, and Chinese clearly indicating that they're not interested in talking for the sake of talking. So as you can imagine, this is just all these 3 items clearly indicate that this is situation sort of typical for like pre-war, when the countries are going into the military conflict. Then there's even more to that. So there's new regulation in China that's effective May 1st with respect to the draft of soldiers into the military service. So they fine-tuning this regulation, and the goal of it is to increase preparedness for the war. Literally, the goal is stating to increase preparedness for the war and increase effectiveness of the military forces by drafting high-quality soldiers. And then it sort of clarifies what it does. What it really means is focus on drafting, like first order who's going to get drafted are those who already have prior military experience. So this is actually very similar to at least what Ukraine has been doing. The ones who were drafted first are the ones who had prior military experience. And as that sort of pool dries up, then the draft spreads to everyone, whoever they can be sort of drafted. Then Chinese president sort of kind of gave kind of like his vision speech, or sort of his philosophical view speech, where he basically compared and contrast China vision for the world, for the new world order, and the West vision. And basically, he accused the West in economic and ideological colonialism and exploitation and basically robbing other countries and so on. And then he highlighted the Chinese way is not that way and it's different and so on. Then Chinese um, like political mouthpiece of basically Chinese propaganda newspaper called Global Times. They also came out with article where they basically say that unipolar world headed by the U.S. is not normal and it will be changed. And again, the same idea, repeating the same idea of colonialism and so on. And basically, they also stated that de-dollarization has started. Um, sort of repeating the same messages that Chinese president gave. So as you can see, this is, those kind of speeches they usually giving, before you attack. It's kind of like a vision or inspiration for everyone in China and for the allies in the world. And obviously that includes Russia. Then we all know that there was a visit of the Brazilian president to China. Again, he's fully supportive of China. Again, supporting this whole de-dollarization effort and so on. As I mentioned before, this is really. It may sound sort of scary and profound, but really at this point, what they achieving is essentially just paying for goods and services in the local currencies, uh, and that really doesn't change the financial system because, as I said before, what currency is used to as a store of value, that's what drives the entire financial system. And so far, US dollar and euro are the leading currencies for the store of value. That's what really defines the money. And so, in a way, these countries in China they switch in sort of kind of like a to barter system in a way, in essentially using their local currency just to facilitate those transactions. And as long as they can offset more or less equally, then it works. But once you cannot offset equally the import and export, then you come into the problem of this unbalanced situation. And in that case, they probably need either US dollars or euro or gold, right? And they not gonna do any of those. Well, meaning they're not gonna do gold just simply because um, uh, gold is essentially is kind of like antidote for any financial and monetary manipulation. So none of these countries want to adopt, let's say, gold standard because it really means you cannot manipulate your currency. And so, because if in the theory, if let's say you want to, you want to remove dollar or remove euro as a true store of value, you can easily do that. All you need to do is accept gold standard, and that's it. It's done. However, none of them are, and by that I mean China, Russia, all of these countries. None of them are, even talking about that for very simple reason because it prevents currency manipulation. It prevents all of these economic policies that essentially pumping a lot of printed money into the system, which actually China just at the beginning of week they actually unleashed avalanche of the credit into the economy, into the Chinese economy, in order to boost it. Because I mentioned before, the GDP is not growing, so and they still have this ambitious target of have I think 5 or 6% for the year. And the way the trade is going, it looks like they may even have contraction actually for the year. So they really desperately need to do something, and the answer in China is very primitive. Let's just pump more debt into the system, and that's how we're gonna push economy to perform. Which also what this also means for their international situation and in the West is that the inflation will remain stubborn, because what this really means that China will be buying more commodities on the world market, because that's where this money eventually will go, and obviously because there are constraints on many commodities, so the prices will go up, and we probably will see in the second half of the year results in CPIs in the West, and probably more so Europe is going to be affected, obviously, but US is also going to get affected. Then there is sort of military aspect, going back to the China and military aspect. So China reported that they tested and successfully tested and deployed long-range hypersonic missile. And the sort of problem with these missiles is there's essentially no effective anti-missile defense for this type of missiles, is because they way too fast, and especially if you have many of them. So at least some percentage will manage to penetrate the anti-missile defense system and do the damage, right? So this, and obviously they will carry nuclear warheads. So some of their sort of targets are going to get hit. And so the China is basically saying, okay, well, we have this hypersonic missile, and they're showing it off to, let's say, US and Europe, which basically deterrent, effectively saying, we're going to invade into Taiwan and you stay away because we're going to use this hypersonic missile. At the same time, what they also declare is China announced that they successfully tested ballistic missile interception system. So what they basically saying, okay, we have tool for offense and you don't have anything defensive against it, so stay away and don't get involved. And at the same time, we have defensive tool in case you're gonna attack us with your offensive tools. So basically, they kind of like beating in two areas, offensive and defensive, kind of saying, okay, you have close to zero chances being successful against us. And this is very clear signal, more so to the US, obviously, than, let's say, Europe, because Europe is trying to stay away from, from directly getting involved into Taiwan conflict. And, everybody heard what the French president is saying, and even there is discussion inside of Europe, because Poland is sort of on the opposite side of France and so on. But for large being, Europe is probably going to try to stay away or support the status quo, because there are very strong economic ties between China and Europe, and Europe doesn't have the cushion that US has, where it has its own natural resources, and it doesn't need sort of, let's say, China to continue sort of the way they live. So, in other words, Europe is much more dependent on China than, let's say, US, because of that. And in general, Europe is extremely dependent because it has essentially virtually zero natural resources. Then relate, like, sort of, again, China, but more also so Russia. Chinese Minister of Defense is going to visit Russia for 3 days starting April 16. This is the same person who is sanctioned by the US for military cooperation with Russia. So, and even though China officially said that we're not helping Russia military-wise, I would say we can look, at prior, let's say, declarations of the Chinese ambassador to European Union, which he said, "Oh wait, this is just he was basically disavowing what was happening between Russia and China. He was saying, "Oh well, this is just rhetoric. We really didn't mean. This is just a figurative speech and so on." So this is the same. Could be like, okay, this is another rhetoric. We're not really helping, but we probably are helping. And to support this, Iran is also officially saying that they're not helping Russia, but Ukraine is being attacked by this Shahid 136 UAVs, and everybody knows that. At the same time, they just denying sort of truth. Even if you have sort of support and clear evidence to support that. Actually, let's actually dive a little bit deeper on Chinese foreign trade, which is export plus import, and export what China sells to other countries, and import what it buys from other countries. So the situation there is deteriorating. As I said, it's pretty bad. I think the whole total trade with the entire world is down 2.9% for the first quarter of 2023, which China is export-driven economy. This is definitely going to be extremely negative for GDP, and that's why I'm questioning whether Chinese GDP is even going to be positive at this point. But at the same time, as I said, that's the reason why Chinese government unleashed avalanche of the credit to basically boost the economy and create sort of artificial activity to sort of boost artificially GDP. Essentially, that's what's really happening. But as I said, the underlying economies there is in pretty terrible shape. But we can also look at sort of regional aspect of this trade. So the sort of biggest, I guess, contributor to decline in the Chinese export is actually U.S. The export to U.S. dropped by 17%. So as you can imagine, this is not a normal situation. This is extremely extraordinary and extremely unusual. At the same time, import from the U.S. by China or purchases from the U.S. by China dropped only 1.7%. In terms of the export, the Chinese exporting about 115, exported 115. The amount of goods was worth 115 billion US dollars. Then also trade with EU is down, but by a lot less, only 5.5% relative to the US. But also what the trade with the EU in terms of absolute value is definitely much larger than with the US. It's 194 billion US dollars. What is interesting actually that France, the trade between France and China actually went up by 2.9%. Then the other sort of, I would say, offsetting in a positive direction for China was trade with ASEAN, which is basically all of these Asian countries around China. There it went up by 7.7%, and the total value is 227.8 billion US dollars. So as you can see, the trade was sort of, call it like regional trade with all of these Asian countries is actually much larger than trade with EU or trade with the US. If you really rank it, like trade with US is actually, as you can see, like a third lowest relative to the regional trade in Asia, then relative to the US, relative to the EU, and then on the US. But at the same time, it's probably the most profitable, most highly marginal activity or export for China that drives most of the profits for China. So again, it's something similar to with the Russian natural gas export to Europe. It was used to be extremely high margin business for Russia, and now switching, let's say, to China, it's definitely not as interesting for Russia. Let's actually switch a little bit to Russia. So Russian Pacific Fleet was put on highest alert and basically on highest preparedness and readiness for the war. And there are some basically tests and so on going on. So again, this is another red flag in terms of preparation for the war. At the same time, head of the Wagner Group made very interesting say speech or proposal. He proposed to actually stop the war against Ukraine, stop where it is. So basically, he said, we conquered some territory, we created some buffer. At this point, let's stop here. Let's protect what we gained at this point. Let's sort of, be on defensive. Let's regroup. Let's rebuild ourselves, and later we can attack again. So as you can see, the Russia is using this kind of like it cannot chew entire Ukraine, so it tries to chew Ukraine piecemeal. And the first step was actually in 2014 when Russia chewed roughly 7% of Ukrainian territory, Crimea, plus portions of the Donbass and Lugansk regions. Now they got even more. I think at this point, another 15% of Ukrainian territory. So basically, this is another sort of, they need a break to regroup, rebuild. The military have more resources, more shells, because they, as I said, they out of the shells, and then sort of there will be new attack. Was it's going to be in 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years? Unclear, but it's very clear that this is long-term Russian strategy to basically conquer entire of the Ukraine. This is not about we just gonna have a peace because we got this new territories and that's enough for us. That's definitely not the case. But right now Russia is in a very difficult position, so they definitely want to stop the war, let's put this way. Then I think that's and then last point on Russia. Russian government is, or Russian parliament, shall I say, is passing windfall tax on the business. Basically, the things are so bad in the state finances and collection of taxes that Russian parliament and government basically decided, like, okay, we're gonna squeeze business. We're gonna do this windfall tax. They say that this is one off, but about 2 months ago, they just did this windfall tax. They managed to squeeze some money from the business, and they, I guess, liked it so much that they decided to repeat the same procedure. It's obviously undermining Russian economy, Russian business. It's squeezing all of the juices and directing it into non value add or sort of negative value add activities such as war and military. But at the same time, this is what Russian leadership wants to do at this point. Now let's kind of switch to Ukraine at this. Let's look what's going on there. And at high level, I would say is that it's turning into the stalemate, or you can even say like it's like starts to sort of like freeze like a concrete and become like unmovable sort of object on both sides. It's very clear going to stalemate. Ukraine doesn't have sort of enough resources to penetrate Russian defenses or make decisive move at this point, and probably in the foreseeable future. And Russia doesn't have the same. And especially Russia is building all of this, like 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, defensive lines. So again, in order to overcome them, you really need even more resources, which Ukraine already stretched to the maximum. There's not enough of military equipment that's coming to Ukraine in terms of create huge advantage to sort of penetrate this Russian defenses. So it does look that there will be essentially stalemate, and How it's going to play out remains to be seen. But at least at this moment, this time point, this looks very, that the war is going to turn really into really positional warfare, very much similar to World War One. And the fact that that's where it's gonna stay for some time until either side gets more sort of support, Russia from China and North Korea, or Ukraine more from the West. Let's say, more support from the West, or significantly more. It doesn't look very likely given the situation in the Pacific. So again, that's very and Ukrainian leadership is unable to start producing weapons in Ukraine. Basically, they do everything that they can to prevent private entrepreneurs to start making weapons in Ukraine. So effectively, everything is blocked in Ukraine, and it's, as I said before, economic desert. And for that reason, it cannot produce on its own. And Russia is somewhat similar situation. Most of the military-industrial complex there is severely damaged, with several exceptions, and one of them is being production of the tanks, and then production of the individual weapons for the soldiers. Let's put this way. But let's say the weak point for Russia is shells, but for Ukraine is essentially everything is a weak point. It gets to that level in Ukraine that there are even shortages of the AK-74, 47, basically all of this Soviet-made assault rifles, and Ukraine is slowly but surely switching to the Western small arms, assault rifles, and so on. So basically, all of that inventory that's being inherited from the Soviet Union, which was huge, just extremely huge, I would say. It's a huge stockpile to conquer the entire world. That's why it was very huge, because it wasn't just for the war with NATO. It was stockpile to conquer entire world, and both sides effectively use majority of that stockpile. There is very little sort of left at this point, and so again, this again leads to this stalemate situation on the front line, and we can see that even from a perspective that, as I said before, this North Lugansk front line becomes essentially also very static, very similar to Zaporizhya front line, and really the fighting is happening only in essentially three small sections of this Donbass front line around Bahmut, and really just Bahmut. Then near Donetsk, where there is this Piskiseli and Avdiivka, and then Marinka, which is a little bit south of Donetsk. But essentially, this is it. The rest is becoming quieter and quieter, and eventually, this Bahmut is probably going to become quiet once Russian side, makes this propaganda victory. We finally captured entire of the Bahmut. Which actually is not very obvious at this moment that they will be able to do that. Really remains to be seen if they manage to capture entirety of the town, because as I said before, Wagner mercenaries are extremely exhausted, small in number, and their offensive abilities are really dwindling extremely fast. So, as I said, it's unclear that they will actually manage to do that, to achieve that goal. So after reviewing this kind of high level strategic situation, let's just do a walk through the front line. So the situation in a clockwise fashion, as I always do, the situation along the state border is more or less the same. Medium level of intensity of exchange of artillery fire, all sort of exchanges, basically adversarial exchanges. Then let's jump to the North Lugansk front line, and things here is essentially quiet. There's always exchange of artillery fire. There's some very local skirmishes here in this forest that sort of never stop, but really nothing truly major here is going on. Now let's jump to the North Donbass front line. Things here also quieting down, let's put this way. The only active place is Bahmut itself, and a little bit more sort of activity, but more sort of just to keep Ukrainian troops here engaged on their northern, directly on the northern flank. But the rest of it is really just essentially quiet. There's some very low activity near Bilohorivka, but it's essentially could be disregarded as a true attacks or anything. So really just this area, and all Russian troops got for all of that is essentially capturing this part of Bakhmut, that's core of it, on their eastern side of the railroad. They managed to cross in the railroad in a couple of places, but it's not decisive yet. And they're basically this thrust is definitely dwindling and really becoming extremely exhausted at this point. This is just a quick review of how things were developing. Again, as you can see, the attacks are really just in Bakhmut, and then like supporting attacks on the northern flank. There's not even anything going on here on the southern flank. So as you can see, this is just shrink to smaller and smaller sector of the front line. It's where it's really getting to like very narrow with just Bakhmut, and probably even in the Bakhmut, let's put this way, if we go back to this whole picture that I shown, even attacks here on the southern sort of flank in Bakhmut also kind of like stopped. So really just attacks are happening on there's north and directly from the east to west, essentially. So as I said, it's really sort of freezing pretty quickly, and Russian side is being depleted of resources, obviously human resources, is extremely quickly, and there's no really replenishment for that right now. Now let's move to check what's going on the central Donbass front line. Things here again, as I said, only this three locations. One is being most prominent Peski salient, then Marinka, and then sometimes we have these attacks here in north of Avdiivka. Sometimes it's quiet. So essentially, this two was essentially really two spots and sometimes third spot, but this is also getting to sort of old and also exhausted essentially. And then this is the situation around Avdiivka. Nothing has changed here since a while. And then situation on the Zaporizhya front line, which is, as you can see here, is the same. There's essentially no meaningful activity. So, for example, if you remember, Vuhledar was very active, and it's quiet at this point. So, again, Russian side doesn't have enough resources to attack in even the number of places that they actively sort of were attacking. They had to sort of shrink. So this whole, as I said, this whole is a summary. The conflict goes to like sort of natural stalemate because both sides are lacking resources to do anything major, and it's turning essentially to this trench warfare or World War One. How it's going to be resolved will remains to be seen. I'll keep providing updates as things sort of develop. But that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Until next time, bye bye.